Hello and welcome everyone. Can I see raise of hands, people who are back? So I can see one hand being raised. Akshay also is back. Kishan is there. Abhishek, how about y'all? The three Abhisheks here. Ajay, Arif, Satish, Amit. I can see few hands going up. Shiv Prasad is back. Kalpesh, Nilesh, Sandeep, Vamshi. So great to see few of them have joined back. Thank you guys. Put your hands down. Rashid is also back. Great. Let's proceed ahead. So before the break, we discussed about various blob lifecycle management rules. So how one can automate this entire process of moving from one tier, that is uh, hot tier to cool tier to cold tier, and then to archive tier. And this would be based on the last modified date or the date when this resource has got created. As far as these rules are concerned, these rules would be triggered automatically by Microsoft based on the schedule that we have mentioned, and it will execute as a job in the background. So all these things will be taken care by Azure in the backend. As an administrator, our job is to create these kind of rules and keep them handy in the storage environment. Next important resource, if you all see, is about blob object replication. Now one would say that Om Prakash, we already made sure that we have multiple copies being created, right? We have multiple copies being created through LRS. Then we have option of GRS, RAGRS, right? ZRS, RAGZRS. There are a number of options that we already mentioned. So why this blob object replication? So like I mentioned earlier, whenever you're talking about replication, the cost is much higher, right? And we have 6 copies when you go for GRS, RAGRS. So if you want to manage some things on our own, right? And we would want to perform number of actions over here, manage the replications ourselves, right? So we can do that as well. So you can create different storage accounts and we can synchronize the contents, synchronize the uh, details that we have from one storage account container into the destination storage accounts, right? So here, if you see the diagram, the resources would be scattered across regions and we can make it work by transferring the contents in respective regions. So let me replicate the same scenario within my storage account. So here I have, if you see the current one, I have a storage account and I have 2 containers within that, images and images 2 container with 1 file each. Let me create respective destination accounts in different regions. And then let me show you how do you configure this asynchronous replication there. OK, so let's do it together. Let's go to storage accounts. So this is in East US right now. Let me create one more storage account, same resource group. Say West US 2. Whatever unique name I want to give. I don't want to add anything else right now. All the properties would remain same. This is in West US2. Let me create one more in Southeast Asia. So I have three storage accounts, and y'all will realize that these are three different regions, but in the same resource group. So like I mentioned earlier, resource group is a logical collection, right? It does not have any restrictions in terms of locations where these resources are getting created. So you need not worry on that. So I have one resource group, data RG. Inside this, I have three members over here, three storage accounts, one in East US, second in West US 2, and third one that we have is in Southeast Asia. Yep, here it is. So if you see the primary one, it is Synergy Store 15. This is the primary one, which has two containers. And here we have another set of storage accounts being created. So here, if you'll see under data management section, here we have object replication. Within object replication, here we can create appropriate rules. And here, if you see, apart from source container, we also need to mention the destination container. So right now we don't have any destination container. Let me create destination container as well. Just to avoid any confusion, I'll keep the same names over here. Destination images and destination images 2. So it becomes easier for me to initiate the replication. Let me go ahead, create appropriate rules over here. Source container, destination container, right? So whenever there's an object change, new objects, or do you want to copy everything, or you have to specify a condition? Right? So we can enable appropriate replication rules over here. Let me create another rule as well. Let me specify the source container. Let me specify the destination container. So any of these actions and activities that we are doing, that I'm doing over here, we can also do it by using JSON configuration. Right. So I have two members over here. So this might take some time to do the replication. I'll leave this as it is. If you see one more advantage over here, I did not mention that earlier. So if you recall, I shared you all a link which has details of all the uh, paired regions. Here, if you see East US and West US too, they are not paired regions, right? And even you cannot think about Southeast Asia being a paired region with East US and West US too, right? So it is up to you to decide which regions or uh, which are the specific customer locations or customer pockets from where we are getting maximum number of requests. So what we can do is we can associate those regions over here. So if you want to go beyond the boundaries of paired regions, object replication can help us in achieving that objective. So till now we have seen configuration of containers. We have seen management of how do you create and upload blobs over here, specifying appropriate access tiers, specifying the rules for this, right? So we have done those aspects over here. And I was also mentioning about the security aspects. I said networking is only one aspect from perspective of security. There are a lot of other aspects from security point of view. So let's take a look at those areas over here. So if you look at the security strategies, there are multiple ways of doing that. So first way over here is using the networking boundaries, virtual network that we discussed earlier, and I showed the examples of the same, of how one can go and protect these things. And when we uh, try to access it, unless the machine through which we are accessing it is is not part of the virtual network, or we have not associated the public IP address, right? Without doing that, it will give us a error. That's one aspect. Second is using storage service encryption, SSE. Now one would say, Om Prakash, do you mean to say that whenever we are uploading or creating any content in storage account, they are not encrypted by default? They are encrypted. There is no doubt on that. But this encryption is Microsoft encrypted, right? This encryption is Microsoft encryption. If we want to enable our own encryption, we want to use our own key for encryption, we can modify that. And what we can do here is we can create our own key. We can create our own key using the key vault service and associate that key for data encryption, right? So till now, from a security point of view, we have seen how do you associate this with a virtual network. Second option over here is specifying a key vault, right? As far as key vault is concerned, key vault has number of secured resources which could be saved over here. So first is storing encryption decryption keys. Second is storing secrets. And third component that we can see store over here is certificates, right? So there are three things that we can store inside a key vault. Out of these three members, out of these three members, we are going to use the first one over here. That is, how do you store an encryption decryption key within this? And after storing this encryption key, how we can use this key to encrypt data inside the storage account. Okay, let's take a look at that. So be with me. I'll be showing number of demos over here of how do you secure contents inside your storage accounts, right? So we already worked with networking earlier. Let's now go for encryption. So here, if you'll see, it says very clearly that Microsoft automatically does encryption using Microsoft managed keys. Can you see this? Using Microsoft managed keys, it is already doing the security. What we can do over here is we can change this Microsoft managed key and map it with customer managed key, right? So this is what we can do. From the encryption key point of view, we can pick up this encryption key from the key vault. So right now I don't have any key being created. What I will do is I will create a new key over here. So before I start performing these steps, let me mention the steps over here. Associating customer key for storage account. So step number one over here. Step number one over here would be create a key vault instance. That will be a step number one. Once the key vault is created, create a key inside key vault. Step number three over here would be associate a key with storage account, right? Three steps over here. Make sure when we are creating the key vault, it is in same region of the storage account. So it becomes available there. Okay. So since I don't have these details, but I know the steps which are required for it. So let me go ahead, create the key vault instance over here, which is our step number one. Now here, if you see, we have data RG, we have network RG. For key vault, can anybody recommend me what should be the resource group name? Anyone, any suggestions? Vanshi has a very good question. Can we enable replication if storage accounts are in different subscriptions or resource groups? Different resource groups, yes. Different subscriptions, I doubt that. But different resource groups, yes, you can. Anyone, any suggestions? What should be the new resource group name for Key Vault? No one? Let me give it name as Security RG, Security Resource Group. See, like I said earlier, each of the team members over here, each of the team members over here, you need to create appropriate resource groups for them, and we can give them relevant permissions. So what is the pricing tier that we want? Retain values for how many days? Access configuration, vault access policy, networking, all networks. Okay. OMP key vault is already there. So even if you by mistake delete a particular key, it will still be retained by Microsoft based on number of days that you have mentioned. Say, for example, I have all the data encrypted by using a specific key. If that key is lost, all the data remains encrypted. You cannot decrypt the data. And even Microsoft can't help you with that because you are using a custom key. You are not using a Microsoft generated key, right? So that becomes a big challenge. So you have to be very, very careful who's allowed access to the key vault, who can perform delete tasks on the key vault. So you have to be very, very careful with that. So three things, like I mentioned, keys, secrets, and certificates. So right now, if you see, Om Prakash is the one who has all the required permissions, key permissions, secret, and certificate permissions. So you can generate a key or generate a key or import a pre-existing key that we have. So whatever name we want to give, set activation date, expiry date, right? So I've got my key successfully created. That is step number two. Step number one was creation of key vault. Step number two was creation of the key. Let's do step number three, which is associating this key to our storage account. So what we are saying is all the content that we have inside this storage account will be encrypted using this new key that we have created. HSM basically refers to hardware security module. So if you have any uh, radius based device which is being configured and you want to map it over here, we can do that. So once we're done with this, let's click on save. So by default, Microsoft is encrypting the contents. But if you want to use your own custom key, we can do that as well. Right? So we have got it done. Right? So this was the first member that we have, which is storage service encryption. So how do we use our relevant keys over here? Second member that we have is authentication with Azure Active Directory, which is now known as Microsoft Entra ID, and RBAC, that is role-based access control. Now, what is this Azure Active Directory, right? So people who have already, or Microsoft Entra ID, people who have already worked with Azure environment, right? They would always have to log in into the environment, right? Now that user ID, the email address that we are referring to, and the relevant password or authentication details, all that is saved inside Azure Active Directory, right? So that's the core purpose of Azure AD. So any of the groups, policies, device registrations, application registration, all that is done with Azure Active Directory. So here, if I go to access control IAM, identity and access management, here we can perform set of role assignments. We can uh, specify any role that you would want to a specific user. Here what we can do is we can add a role assignment. If you see, there are reader permissions, owner permission, contributor permission for specific set of services. My interest area right now is storage permissions. You can see this blob data contributor, blob data owner. These are the permissions which I want to give. And these permissions I want to give to a specific user, or I can give it to a specific group which I have. You see this? So there are multiple synchronized users as well. So what am I doing right now? I'm specifying storage blob data contributor to Om Prakash as a user. And that is specifically for this particular storage account. So here if you'll see the authentication method, we can change the authentication method to Microsoft Entra user account. Can you see this? Microsoft Entra user account, which means now if anybody has to access this particular container, what one has to do is we will have to log in as that particular user. So using that credentials, using that particular uh, user ID and password as a token, we'll get permissions to access this container, right? So this is another way of how one can specify permissions for a particular storage account, right? So this is about authentication. Now, whether it works, whether it not works, right? Whether it will create a problem, those things we can verify if we write an application, or if you log in as another user and then try to access this resource, only then we will figure it out. Currently, what is happening is I have already added myself, given myself the permission, contributor permission, and then I am accessing it. If you see the third member over here, client-side encryption, HTTPS-based support, SMB 3.0 for data in transit, some of these attributes are some taken care by Microsoft itself behind the scene. So here, if you see HTTPS, and even in case of endpoints that we discussed earlier, if you remember that, all the endpoints over here are mapped with HTTPS, right? So this implementation of SSL is by default for your storage accounts. For SMB 3.0, this we can verify by creating the resource over here. And again, this is all things these all things are happening in the backend. To check this out, we can go to file share, and here we can create a new file share for us. Whatever name we might want to mention over here. Transaction optimized. Oops, let me not enable the backup right now. I don't need backup. I only need the file share to be created. That's all. So go to backup, uncheck this checkbox, enable backup. So once it comes to file share is primarily about SMB as a protocol. And how do we create members over here? How do you create resources within it? You can mention whatever quota we want. I want to create a quota for 10 GB for now. What is the SMB protocol settings that we want to do over here? So all these things are pre-built as part of our storage account. So we just need to go and configure it. So for storage service encryption, it was there by default. We modify it with a custom key. Then I showed you all how do you authenticate, create role-based access control for our members over here. Then we discussed about SMB. Let's go for Azure disk encryption. Before I do that, anyone, any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions as of now. Let's go for Azure disk encryption. Now, once it comes to your virtual machines, right? Within virtual machines, what we'll be doing is we'll be associating number of disks over here, right? One will be a OS disk, second will be the data disk, and I can have multiple data disks as well. So since we have not discussed about virtual machines for now, I am not going to show you the virtual machine and the disk attached there. We'll do that part later. Right now, I'll just show how do you create a disk and secure that by using disk encryption set. Okay, so let's understand that part. Let's look for disk first, and then I'll create a disk encryption set. This disk encryption set will also require a key vault key. I'm sorry, guys, I'm saying too many things. So let me mention the steps here. Associating disk encryption, securing disk using disk encryption set. Okay, so step number one over here, would be in previous scenario, we already had the storage account. Here, we don't have a disk. So first step will be creation of disk over here. Then create a key vault instance, add a key, add an encryption key inside key vault. Right? So this B and C, these two steps we already have done. Next step here will be create a disk encryption set. Create a disk encryption set. Associate the key with disk encryption set. And once it is done, we can go and associate the disk encryption set with our disk. Right? So these are the steps involved for mapping the disk encryption set with the disk. Now, what are we trying to achieve with this? See, any content that we have, when you talk about data and you talk about security of data, right? So one place where all this data is being stored will be your storage account, right? That's one. Second place where the data is being stored would be inside the disk. Okay. Second place where the data is being stored would be inside the disk. And this disk will be associated with respective machines that we have. Right? So what one should be doing is we want to make sure this data is protected. This data is protected with an encryption key. So we have associated the key vault here. Another is to protect data within these disks. So what do I do for that? So we will need to associate disk encryption set with these disks, right? And to create this disk encryption set, if you see the uh, diagram over here, even this diagram shows a key. So where do you get this key from? So this key, you will get it from the key vault. Okay. So get this key from the key vault, create your disk encryption set. Create your disk encryption set and associate the disk encryption set with respective disks over here. Let's take a look at it. Let's see how it gets created within our Azure environment. So step number one is creation of a disk. I already have data RG, disk name, whatever name we want, source type. If you already have a pre-existing disk, you can mention that. Please be careful. This is premium SSD 1 TB. Let me change that to standard HDD 32 GB. Key management. Okay. key management, platform managed key. We will leave this as it is. We will change it later when we associate the key vault key over there. Same way how we did for storage account. And like I said, we yet have to create disk encryption set. We don't have that as of now. So meanwhile, the disk is creating. Let me create disk encryption set. Security RG. Encryption at rest with customer managed key. So there are two types of encryption. One is encryption in transit. Second is encryption in rest. So here we are using encryption at rest, the data being stored inside the storage account and data being stored inside the disk. Here we can make use of double encryption. So one encryption is with platform managed key. Second encryption is with customer managed key. So two encryptions. I already have a key vault. Let me select that. I already have a key. Let me select that as well. So if you remember the steps, step number one is creating a disk. Step number two is creating disk encryption set. Associate the disk encryption set with your key vault key. And once that is done, we can associate our disk encryption set with our disk. Yeah. So we are ready over here with our disk encryption set. It says to grant to associate, we have to grant permissions. Let's click on the link over here. This is successfully grant the permission. So we have our disk ready. We have our disk encryption set ready. Let's do the association. So if you go to the encryption here, encryption of the disk, platform managed key, because we have used double encryption. That's what is showing over here. So we have associated this. We have mapped it over here. So we have got our security implementation for the disk using disk encryption set. OK. So till now we have seen 4 implementations, right? Storage service encryption. I have got the file share created. I have shown you all how do you specify Azure AD role-based access control. So you can pick up any of the users from there. Then we discussed about shared access signature. Right? Sorry, now we need to go for the shared access signature. Now, what is this shared access signature all about? How does it work? What are the options available here? Let's take a look at that. And parallelly, I will also discuss about the shared key over here. Right? So both of these members, anonymous access, I don't have to explain you all. This is the first thing that we create, that we began with. How do you uh, specify anonymous access to the container, due to which we'll be able to see the contents there. So guys, once we come to our storage accounts, here we can create a shared access key at different levels. Right? So here, if you all see the shared access key, it is available on the storage account level. It is available on the container level, on the blob level as well. Right? Oh, sorry, my mistake. This is shared access signature that we're talking about. The next one, just below access keys. So if you see the options available here. Now, please be careful. This shared access signature key can be dangerous or can be your friend as well, depending upon how much permissions we are giving. So if you see this particular SAS token, shared access signature token, is giving blob, file, queue, table, all services allowed, all resource types allowed, all permissions being given, and it could be for much longer duration. Right now it is just for a day, right? It could be for a longer duration as well. It can have public IP addresses, which is being allowed protocols, right? And we can generate our SAS token. This would be a pretty dangerous thing because you are giving permissions across all services. To make it much better, to make it much better and have a helpful resource for us, this is something that we can do, right? Allowed services, blob, allowed resource types, what permissions you want to give them, read permissions, write, read permissions, list permissions. Okay. So this becomes much safer shared access signature. So it's up to us to decide what is the level that you'd want over here. How many security restrictions you want to enforce using this member. Right? It is always recommended to have a much smaller timeline, right? Depending upon whatever tasks or activities that we are focusing on. So you can stop any kind of misuse of the resource, right? So this is the kind of SAS token which will get generated. Let me copy this SAS token, notepad. So this is my storage account level SaaS token. And if we observe this keenly, it mentions about the date, it mentioned about the scope, right? What permissions is being given. Sorry, what permissions. This is the level, storage account level. What permissions is being given, read permissions, list permissions, find permissions, what is start date, end date that we have, what is the protocol being used, and what is the key which is being used for signature, right? So this is a token that we have generated using the storage account level. The problem which I'm facing is I don't understand how do I use this token. Anyone who can help me with that? Once I have, Vamshi has another question. By using double encryption, will there be any performance lag? Yes, there might be a, I would say, so for some milliseconds, not beyond that. But if the data is very, very critical, it is recommended to have double encryption. How critical is that data for you? It's based on that. So guys, I have got my SaaS token generated. So can anybody help me? How do I use this SaaS token? Anyone, any suggestions? So here, if we go to the containers section, especially images 2, yeah. So I'm facing this problem over here. So it says this resource is not available. This this resource does not exist. So my content URL or the blob URL which I have, this is my blob URL, and this is the token which I have with me. Let me associate both of it. Let me associate the file with the token which I have generated. Can you see this? So once I have the token associated, I'll automatically get the content from there. So now what is happening is, so the moment we specify this token, it will check if this token is correct or not. And this token information is also stored in the backend. Say read list file, and I also change that URL to write token. Immediately this will fail. And it also can tell you where is a mischief being done over there. Because this token is also, it's not just given to the customer, but this token is also stored on the server side within the Azure environment. So if somebody has made changes to the token, it will automatically give an error. Right? So this is the magic which happens. So we are associating a token over here with the particular resource which was private, anonymous, or private or no anonymous access. Next level where we can create these tokens is on the container level. So I can go to my container. Here I can specify the permissions, what permissions I would want, the duration. So you'll see more or less the format remains the same. The only difference that we have is where you are creating this token. So this was on storage account level. This is on the container level. Right? So this is on the container level. If you see the details over here, SR is equal to C. SRT is equal to SCU. That is the difference over here. Apart from that, most of it you'll see is very much similar. How do I use this token? I don't have to tell you all that. So now your image URL along with this image URL, we'll need to use a container level token. Right? So same content, same information being available using any one of these tokens. Now guys, which one is more secured? Container level token? Which one is more secured? Using a container level token or using a storage account level token? Thanks, Akshay. Thanks for a quick response. Akshay says container level token is more secured. The reason being, when you look at container level token, you are very, uh, uh, you're restricting the resources being accessed using that token, right? The files which are within that container, only they will be accessible. Whereas if you go for, uh, if you look at the reusability level, so which one is more reusable? Container level or storage account level? Reusability point of view. So what do you all recommend? Which one will be more reusable? Which token? Storage account level token or container level token? Thanks, Akshay. It will be storage account level token, because one storage account level token can be used across multiple containers. Okay, it can be used across multiple containers, whereas container level token can be used only for one container, not beyond that. So if I go for, images, I have changed the uh, access permissions over here. Let me copy this URL. Right. So this is the new URL which I have, not from images 2, but from images. So if I try verifying the content using this URL, I know that since I have changed it from anonymous to private access, it will give me an error. I'm aware on that. What I want to do is I want to use both the tokens over here. So first token which I would want to use is a container level token. Let's check that. Let's use a container level token. And let's see if that works. Oops. I'm sorry. This token is not applicable for this particular content. Okay. Let me try using storage account level token. Can you see this? So you're getting the content here. So what is your focus right now? Are you looking for reusability, or are you looking for sensitive information, protected information, right? Based on that, we can use these tokens appropriately. If you want to increase the security level with zero reusability, we can create a file level token as well. So here, if you'll see, there's something called as generate SAS. This is a blob level token or a file level token. What permissions you want to give, duration, this is called as a SAS level token. So other than creating the token myself, I'm just copying it from here. Right? And if I paste this URL on the notepad, so initial file URL is the same. SP is equal to R, read permissions, start time, end time. Right? This is a file level token or a blob level token. SR is equal to B. As far as the resource is concerned, the resource over here is mapped to a single blob. Getting everyone? So this is how one can make use of relevant tokens. You all might be finding it slightly weird how to go and create these things, copy it from there, paste it. But please understand, from a programming point of view, development point of view, you can generate these tokens, create these tokens, right? Programmatically as well, associate it dynamically with your resource and protect those members. Correct? So those options are also available to us. So this is all about various security strategies, data, protecting data at rest, protecting data in transit, right? How do we ensure that? What are the options available for it? We have options for server-side encryption, client-side encryption. I'll quickly run through these things that we have done. I have shown you all how do you create shared access signatures at different levels. What are the members inside that? I've shown you how to create the SAS URL. We have looked at the encryption options as well. Storage service encryption, which is the default one. How do we change that? How do we change that member over here? Add new resource. Okay. Add a new resource over here. using key vault keys. If you look at some of the best practices, some of these points I have already mentioned. Be careful with the SAS start time, end time that you are mentioning. Validate the data written using the SAS token. That would be the additional aspect over here. Always use HTTPS to create and distribute the SAS, because that will help you for runtime verification, runtime association over here. So we'll stop with this. Anyone, any questions? We'll stop with this, take a quick break. Once we come back, the next topic which I want to discuss about is Azure files. And if you'll remember, we already have a file share being created, right? And I will be creating a virtual machine, and inside the virtual machine, we'll access these contents, access these resources over there. And we'll look at whether how the permissions are working in that context. How do you make use of file share resources? We have not enabled cross tenant replication. That's not required as well. Perfect. Let's take a break. Once we are back, we'll look at you see this. So the replication is already being done. OMP West US store, even for Southeast Asia. Also, you can see the content. Now, both these contents we have received from the replication. So after the break, we'll create a virtual machine. I'll show you all how do you attach the disk that we have created, right? Along with that, we'll also discuss about the file share. How do we associate that with our virtual machine, right? So all these things we will map to our virtual machine. Everyone grab a cup of tea or coffee. Let's assemble back in 15 minutes, 1-5.
Hello, participants. Still, so many participants are remaining to redeem the badge. Please, participants, go and redeem your badge. This is very beneficial for you only.
Welcome back, everyone. Can I see raise of hands? People who are back. I'm sure everybody has. I'm sure everybody is back, and each of y'all have already redeemed your badges. Can I see raise of hands? People who are back. I can see two hands being raised. Jaipal is back. Isaac also is there. Great. Thank you, guys. Put your hands down. Let's proceed ahead. So till now we have seen quite a few details from a storage account perspective. What are the options available here? How do we go ahead and create these resources? How do you add shared access key? So we have seen multiple options from perspective of storage account. Out of these 4 services, like I said earlier, we are using 2 services right now. One is the blob service, and second resource which we are using right now is Azure Files. From on-premises point of view, apart from the system-based storage or system-based contents that we also have a shared resource, shared environment with us on a separate machine where all the HR policies or shared installables, commonly used resources, all of these things are being stored onto a shared location, right? That is your file share. Same entity can also be created on Azure storage environment using Azure Files. So if you compare them with Azure Blobs, Azure File is primarily using a SMB based interface. As far as SMB is concerned, this is server message blocks, and the core purpose of SMB, like I said earlier, is enabling faster lift and shift of applications to cloud, sharing data across multiple virtual machines, right? That is one of the important aspects over here. We can have our storage development, debugging, whatever common tools and installers that one would want. All of these can be stored at one place, right? That would make the life easier for the administration purposes. Your scripts that you have, configuration files that we have, right? So these things can be stored on Azure Files. As far as blobs are concerned, we already mentioned about the blobs, the purpose of blobs available, right? How we can use blob storage, page blob storage, depending upon the content which we are storing, right? So those things we have already discussed earlier. Once it comes to files, we can also have premium tier over here, right? So we can use premium SKU depending upon the IOPS that we are looking at, input output per second that we are looking at. So once we are creating these file share, the first thing that should be done over here is we can specify right set of quota for it, right? So what is the size of that content that you would want? And we can associate this file share with Windows environment, Linux environment, Mac, and by default, it has SMB 3.0 encryption enabled for it, right? And all this is happening in the backend. We don't have to do anything for SMB 3.0 encryption. If we go back to our Azure environment, and if we go to the file share that we have created, right? So here we have OMP file share, 10 GB size that we have configured for it. So similar to your blob environment, similar to the blob environment, we have upload options available here. It's a pretty big file, 28 GB. Do I have a smaller one? Let me use, say, a putty over here, putty installer, right? Now, the reason why I'm doing this is across machines, I may need putty for logging in or connecting to the Linux based VMs, which I'm going to create in future. So I have uploaded that resource within my file share. OK. Now, once we have the common contents being uploaded over here, we can map a specific drive letter, right? From an authentication point of view, we can associate it using Microsoft Entra, or we can associate or access it by using storage account key, whichever way is comfortable for us, right? So we can do that. One more thing, let me enable. I have let me save the firewall settings. So I've removed the client IP mapping over here. Right? So it will start showing the error whenever I try accessing the containers over here. So this container right now is mapped using let me go back to this security once again. It's fine. Images 2. Yeah, now this is working. It might take some time to get the screen refreshed. Yeah, so you'll see all of these resources have restricted access because we have changed the networking policy, right? So step number 1 over here would be creating a file share, associating that with appropriate drive letter. And once that is being done, we can upload a set of resources here. So once we have our contents being uploaded, we can take a backup of that using Azure Site Recovery as an option. And along with that, we can also take a snapshot of these resources, right? Now, this snapshot is another way of taking a backup of the content at a specific point in time. And in future, whenever there is an accidental deletion of any content is being lost, we can recover it from that snapshot, right? So that's all with file share. I'll stop here and go to the virtual machine implementation. Like I mentioned before the break, though we have not discussed in depth in terms of virtual machine, but everybody has a fair amount of idea in terms of the purpose of virtual machine. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let me take a new resource group here as compute RG, compute resource group. Let's mention the name of our virtual machine. Use storage VM. Right. Let me take a Windows machine here. Since I don't have much time in terms of installation, configuration, and because smaller, lesser CPU you take, it will take more time to install and configure things. Let me open up RDP port. From a disk point of view, I'll go for standard HDD. And here, if you see, from a key management point of view, even for the OS disk, I can use my existing disk encryption set, right? Even for OS disk, I can use disk encryption set. Add data disks. Now I can do it right now, or I can do it after the VM creation. Both of it is fine. I already have an existing disk. I am attaching that disk over here to my existing machine. So whatever resources we have created, we can optimally use those resources within our new machine that we are creating. Networking. I already have a virtual network. I have a single subnet inside that. Let me associate a public IP. I'm not getting into load balancer and other details as of now. We will do that after you'll have enrolled for the session, and we go into details of why load balancer, what is the load balancer, right? That's where we'll discuss it. Right? We'll also discuss about the availability sets in our actual session. Now, when you are creating your machines, you have a automation behind the scene. And as part of the automation here, you can enable auto shutdown of systems after a specific at a specific timeline. This is recommended for development machines, right? For production machines, which are running 24/7, 365, for them will not enable auto shutdown. From monitoring point of view, now this is a very, very important aspect, guys. If the machine is not performing as per requirement, or if there are any challenges there, here we can use our storage account and we can push all the contents. We can store all the information within log analytics data store, right? That's one. Or you can store it within your storage account. In future, we can also associate this storage account with log analytics, right? So from a long-term point of view. So all that details we'll discuss as part of the monitoring details in our sessions. So like I said, so I'm already using the disk. I'm already using the disk encryption set. I'm already using the storage account, everything network, which I had already created within the virtual machine over here. So in case you want to install any kind of extensions, okay. So all the information we can ratify over here if everything that you have mentioned is done correctly or not. So you'll realize different team members have different set of roles to play. So one team is taking care of the data storage, another team is taking care of the security, networking, right? So each team members will have their own resource groups. Okay. Each team member, each team member would have been part of a specific Entra group, Microsoft Entra ID group, right? They will be having appropriate permissions to create, modify, delete resources, right? And once these things are ready, somebody from the server team or the compute team, they will go and integrate all these members together to, to create a final compute environment. So from a governance point of view, this is how governance will play a vital role. So what resource groups to create, which users and groups to give permissions, and how the entire end-to-end environment management is being done. So give it a moment. It should not take much time. The reason being most of the resources we already have apart from the virtual machine. While this VM is getting created, we create one more machine. This time, let me take a Linux VM. Okay. So I can associate the same storage account for multiple VMs. So we can create a Windows machine, Linux machine, whatever configuration one would want. So we'll go into more details of this in our actual session. While this is getting created in the backend, we have our first VM ready. Let's connect to our virtual machine. Let's log in over here. So I'm trying to wrap up everything by creating a single resource, associating all the members that we have created since morning. And this is how you build your infrastructure. So understand each and every component, create the resources accordingly. So from a Windows Server point of view, Server Manager will play a very, very vital role. Okay, so if you have to add any kind of roles over here. So before we go in that area, I first want to associate the disk over here, which I have created, which I have added to my virtual machine. Wow, I already have two disks over here. Sorry, the second disk is not which I had added. Remember, it was a small disk of 10 GB. This is actually a temporary disk which gets added. So don't get surprised with this. This is a default temporary disk. This is not the disk that we had added. So where is that disk? Let me find it out. Here under files and storage services. Shall see this? So online 32 GB. This is the disk that we had attached. Let me associate it over here with my Windows Server environment. So what is the size? Which drive letter you want to map it to? What is the volume name that you want to associate here? Okay, so I'm done with this. If I go back to my environment here, I have a separate disk being attached, F drive. And this F drive is the one which is the disk which I had created. And this is associated with the disk encryption set. Don't worry, from a usage point of view, you'll not see any difference. But if you go to your Azure environment, there you'll see that this disk is mapped with the disk encryption set. Right? Usage point of view, it will be very similar like any other disk. The next thing that we are supposed to do is, let me log into the Azure portal. Let me log into the Azure portal. And now let me go to the storage account here. Let me go to the containers. You see the magic here. It will not show any errors similar to what we were getting in the host machine or the base machine that we have. If I go and access these contents from inside the VM, it is 100% smooth. Right? So this is, I think, morning somebody had a question if we can check how this works. So this is how it will work. Second thing to verify is the file share, not just seeing the content, but also mapping it to the drives over here and accessing this putty. Right? So let's go ahead. Let me do the connection over here. whichever drive letter we want to map over here, no issues. We'll get a PowerShell script. Let me run this PowerShell script over here. You can use PowerShell ISE. We can use PowerShell command line environment as well. Right. So once you have the script here, we just have to run this script. If I try running the same script within my local machine or my host machine, it'll fail there because this association will only be possible in the machines within that virtual network. Right. So if you see, I have a file share and I have putty available here. So once this mapping is being done, I can access the installer. I can access the installer. I can access the contents which I have within my file share, right? And this will be only within the machine which is in the same network, right? So once putty is being installed, I don't think anybody should have a problem here in understanding the accessibility of the next machine, which is the Linux machine. I can access this machine by using this putty as a tool. That's it. I'm already connected to my Linux machine. So what I have done is using this shared, uh, using this file share, I have uploaded the content, uploaded a MSI over there. I have accessed that MSI. I've accessed that installer. And now I'm able to connect to my Linux machine inside my environment, right? So this is how, as an administrator, we'll be able to access number of other details. It could be VS Code or any other resource that one would want, right? So once you have access over here, we can install relevant updates for the same. Apt install update. I'm not sure if I'm doing a mistake here. But apt update should be good enough. Do I need to mention install here? Yep. apt update should be good enough. It'll automatically install the latest updates which are available for the given operating system. apt install nginx or whichever servers that one would want to install over here. We can do that. And once we're done with this, we can use curl command, curl http://localhost. Yep. So you have any kind of installation, configuration, management of resources, all these things we can do from a administrator's point of view. Right? So we have got the file share, we have got the disk being associated, disk encryption set associated with our OS disk. All these things are mapped within the virtual machine with number of resource groups over here. Anyone, any questions? How can we enable internet access in VM? Yeah, unlike AWS, here you don't have to perform any additional steps over here for internet. What one can do is we can go to the virtual machine. We can go to network security group. So once you, whether you want to go for, I'll do it for Linux machine. We can do the same thing for Windows machines as well. So here we can go to the network settings. Within network settings, we can go to network security group. 1 minute. I think there is some change in the UI here. Yeah, sorry. Here, if you see, right now, by default, there is only one port being open, which is SSH port. We need to add a new port rule on the network security group. That's all what is required, nothing else. And which port you want to open over here. So here we can open port for HTTP, HTTPS, whatever priority you want to mention. And this will create a security rule. So any communication that you're doing, all this communication will be via NSG. Right? So once we are so here we should automatically have the public IP address. And since we have opened the HTTP port on NSG, we'll be able to access that content. Umesh, do we get it? And we don't have to do anything to enable access inside the VM. Inside the VM, you by default have internet access unless you disable it. Shivaraman, curl command will help you to, it's like connecting to a website by using a URL. See the URL. That's why it is called as CURL. Nilesh, so if you say, for example, if I go to my Windows machine right now, I don't have any content over here. So if I would have done the same installation on my local machine, so whatever contents I put over here, see here I have some file. So whatever contents I put on the file share, right? Since this is just a 1 KB file, this could be a 10 GB, 15 GB kind of file. So once this file is being uploaded over here, whatever time it takes, right? Once this file is uploaded, this file will automatically be accessible to all machines wherever this file share is being enabled. So you need to go there and download that content locally. On that file share, you already have that resource. You just have to download that. And I have done this in my previous sessions. So I was working with Ansible, so and I needed the OA file. So once I got this OA file created with Ansible installed, I copied it on multiple machines for Ansible agents and management of those machines. I do understand there are a lot of other topics pending, but I'm not getting into that. From whatever has been covered till now, anybody, any questions from virtual machine point of view, storage account, not virtual machine, because virtual machine itself will have a lot of other details. From storage account point of view, because that was a major subject. Anyone, any questions? Anyone, any questions that you'll have here? So what we have discussed till now is from storage account perspective. Just give me some more time. I need to wind up few more other important details from perspective of file share. So once it comes to storage account, there are a lot of other services also available, which is more in terms of simplifying the process of communication, simplifying the way how these things would work. So here we have Azure Storage Explorer, right? We have import export service. Believe me, guys, the kind of UI that you have for storage account right now, it was not the same earlier, right? It was very cryptic, and there were a uh, lot of traversal that one needed to do, right? But Microsoft has slowly and steadily added all these things within the same environment. So earlier, what used to happen is most of these things we used to do using the Storage Explorer. It made life much more simpler. And even people who are from Windows background having a tree view kind of thing. So those things you'll be able to see as part of Storage Explorer. You can add this as part of your Visual Studio, or you can install this as a tool within your local environment. So you can work with that. Second important service that you have is import export service. So whenever we are transferring large amount of data from on premises to Azure. So a lot of people have questions in terms of migration. So import export service is another uh, tool that we have for migration of contents, where you can copy the details within a disk, right? Encrypt that and physically send it to Microsoft's data center, right? Courier it to Microsoft data center. So here, if you see, you'll have shipping information, shipping details. In terms of job details, what is the content that you want to write inside it? Right? So all those things will be inside the job details. If you see the options available here, we have import into Azure and export from Azure. So there might be an organization who would want to take a backup of their data, which is available on Azure. So you can export that data from Azure and create a local copy for that as well. Or there could be organizations who don't want to continue with Azure. They want to discontinue with Azure services, right? So they can ask Microsoft to share back their information, get those details onto a disk, and continue with their on-premises environment as well. Third resource that you see is using easy copy. Though it's written as AZ copy, it is better to read as easy copy. It's a simplified tool for copying contents. So from a lower level, or to say level 1, you can go for file share. Level 2 is AZ copy. Level 3 or level 3 is import export service. Level 4 will be data box. So there are multiple options available within Azure, depending upon the size of data, depending upon uh, kind of security restrictions that you have. So all these things can be managed here. If you look at Storage Explorer, we can go to our current resource. So here you have storage browser. Oops, there is a problem here of network. But I have multiple storage accounts, so that's not an issue. I can show that information. This is enabled from all networks. Okay, there's no container here. Okay, not an issue. Let me go inside the VM, access my Azure portal. Okay, so if you look at the storage account, let's go to file share. Or if you want to go to containers, you'll be able to see the details here. Let me go to storage browser. So if you see the members over here, right? So having a tree view kind of thing. Now this is something which is not available directly within the storage accounts, right? So go to images, whatever folders, files, accessing contents inside that. Can you see this? So this kind of hierarchy or a tree view we can get inside the storage browser or storage explorer, right? So navigation wise, this becomes much more easier. Apart from that, if you look at the set of operations to be performed, adding a directory, uploading the content from here, right? So from an operations point of view, you don't see any difference inside that. So both the advantages, that is a hierarchy view or a tree view, and along with that, working with the resources over here. As far as AZ copy is concerned, we can download that as a tool within our environment, or we can go to the Cloud Shell. So here, if you'll see, there's a Cloud Shell resource available. So if you see the options available for AZ copy, you can copy the contents from AWS to Azure, AZ copy, CP. You can copy it from Google Drive as well, storage.cloud.google.com. What is a bucket? What is a folder name? Copy to the Azure environment. Even from on-premises to Azure, you want to copy, you can make use of AZ copy. Even if you want to download things, even reverse is possible. Downloading anything from Azure storage account into your local resources, even that can be done. Right? And similar to the object synchronization, which I showed you all earlier, you can configure AZ copy to run as a service, right? Schedule it to run after every 1 hour, 2 hour, or whatever based on cron expression that you want to mention. You can do that as well. Download the entire storage account, src account, blob.co.windows.net to a local path or a directory. So both the options are available here. That is uploading contents and also downloading content from your Azure environment to your local environment. Anyone? Any questions over here from storage point of view? Can we access shared data from another region? I didn't get that. Are you saying about file share, Jaipal? See, as far as file, see, any service, you have two ways of accessing it. One is through the RESTful URL, and second is associating that disk within that VM. So if you're talking about association, then it has to be in the same region. If you're accessing using the RESTful URL, you can access it from anywhere. RESTful URL will be the right option for you. But if you are trying to associate this as a disk within your VM, it should be in the same region. Sure, Shivraman. So Shivraman, we mentioned about blobs and disks. So as far as blobs are blobs are concerned, blob basically is a way of storing information, right? Uh, it's a logical storage environment which is segregated in terms of containers, and within each container you'll have your subfolders, you'll have your files over here that you want to upload and create. Now one of these file types could be disk, right? One of these file types could be a disk, and that disk type would be a unmanaged disk. So if you go back to your virtual machines, within your virtual machine, there are two options. One is managed disks and second is unmanaged disk. what we did right now while we were creating the machine, we have used a managed disk. Okay, just give me one moment. So these disks that you are seeing, these are managed disks, right? Along with this, you also have an option of creating a unmanaged disk, which I don't think is available here. Just give me one moment. When you are going for unmanaged disk, that unmanaged disk gets created on storage account. If you go to the advanced section, availability zone requires. Yeah, can you see this? I don't want to use unmanaged disk. So here you'll have to select a storage account. So in this storage account, it will create a blob, which will be having the entire content of your disk. And this is applicable for generation 1 machines. This was the older approach. The new approach that we have now is usage of managed disks, which is slightly expensive in nature, but it is much more easier to manage these disks because most of it is done by Microsoft in the backend. From a SLA point of view, having multiple replicas behind the scene. Shivraman, does it help you understand things better? Perfect. So guys, we'll stop with this for today because if I start with a new topic, it'll take slightly longer and I don't want to leave you halfway through. So in today's session, our entire focus was in terms of storage account, and we have discussed in depth in terms of what are the storage options available and how do we work with it. If anybody has any questions from storage account point of view, do let me know so I can assist you all with the same. If anybody has created any resources, make sure you all delete that. Because if you keep your resources running, this will cost you all. Thank you very much, everyone, for the complete session of 4 days. You all can register with us. You can share your details on the current chat or you all can connect to Archie. Archie, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so over to you.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful session. I hope all the participants found today AZ-104. So if you have any question and queries, please put your question on chat box. Our speaker will help you. Also, I shared the feedback form. Please, guys, go and fill this feedback form. We value or continuously improve our webinars. So, guys, go and fill this feedback form. Participants, I shared again. Guys, go and fill this feedback form. Participants, I already shared new link. Guys, go and fill this feedback form. Also, I shared our upcoming event details. So, interested participants can go and register themselves. Please note that registration is mandatory to join this webinar. We will share this recording of this session in a registered email ID, so don't worry about that.